Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. As we deliberate the latest developments here in Israel, throughout the region and beyond, it's always important to remember how the war in the Gaza Strip began. 244 days ago, on October 7th of 2023, the Islamist Hamas terror organization, alongside other terror groups from the Gaza Strip, launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping 246 people, including elderly, men, women, and children. 125 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, Egypt has invited the Iranian proxy Palestinian Islamic Jihad alongside the PFLP to come and deliberate the various framework of the deal that was laid out to the Islamist Hamas in an attempt to try and pressure the Hamas organization. Qatar is doing the same according to its own statements, and statements of the United States is working tirelessly to try and pressure Hamas. But it seems that Hamas is pushing back. It's not succumbing to those pressures at this moment in time. And at the same time, the fight continues. What am I missing here?
You're not missing anything, Jonathan. Let us just for a moment pull back and pay homage to D-Day, today 80 years ago, because obviously without the courage and boldness and sacrifice of both the troops who landed at Normandy from the air and from the sea, and their commanding officers, General Eisenhower, President Roosevelt, and the rest, Prime Minister Churchill, the Holocaust would not have been stopped. And 3 years after the war ended, the State of Israel would not have been established. And just as an aside, when you look at the coverage of the festivities in Normandy, you can see the grandfather of the Jealots of the pier, which has been affixed to the Gaza beach and then torn apart by the weather. But the artificial harbor or harbors, which the allies have sent to the beaches for logistical purposes, we can see only a very minor detail of it in Gaza today. Now, as for your question, yes, the minor organizations which you just mentioned, they may have some role in putting pressure on Hamas, but it is not going to be conducive to getting a deal, because Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader, is not going to budge from his main demand, and that is that at phase 2 of the deal, Israel will commit itself to stopping the war altogether and withdraw its forces from Gaza. And if Israel will not do it, he expects the United States to guarantee on its own that it will force Israel to do it. And we are at this delicate stage of the negotiations. Right now, neither of the parties, Israel and Hamas, is conceding. Perhaps the mediators will give some carrots or will wield some sticks of their own, and the impasse will be broken. But while they are doing that, there are 3 divisional headquarters operating in Gaza, in central Gaza and in the southern part of Rafah. And a few hours ago, there was a very peculiar incident where a Hamas squad tried to attack. It operated in the buffer zone, not far from Kerem Shalom, which is the entry point on the east to the Rafah area. The squad was eliminated, but one Israeli trooper a Bedouin scout was killed, and his fatality is added to the long list of Israeli uniformed personnel killed since October the 7th, not on that very day. And there was another one yesterday in the Lebanese front, in the Druze village of Khurfesh, about which we will probably talk later.
Indeed. Well, with regard to the Bedouin tribe, it really, my heart goes out to the Bedouin tribes in southern Israel who've been fighting alongside their Jewish, Druze, Christian compatriots in a very vigorous manner, not to forget that entire families from a number of tribes were taken hostage. A couple of them were also killed. So we're talking here about it's not a Arabs versus Jews. It is the Islamist Hamas versus the fact that the state of Israel is existing. And because ultimately, as Hamas notes in its charter time and again, it is a travesty in their perspective that a non-Islamic entity controls the lands which it regards as part of the Islamic Waqf, as was cited, of course, by the first conqueror or Islamic conqueror at the time, a caliph back in the 6th century. So we're talking here about a very challenging reality where Hamas will never agree to a permanent ceasefire itself. This is something that I believe that people need to understand. According to its charter, the way that it sees its struggle continuing is by means of jihad. Jihad, an armed war, a holy war in its perspective to liberate Islamic or occupied Islamic lands, and this is how it sees it. Nevertheless, it does demand of Israel to surrender. Even though it's with the back against the wall, it demands of Israel to surrender by basically saying, okay, we'll end the war, we'll leave you in place, and we'll take a couple of steps backwards by basically withdrawing all of our troops from the Gaza Strip. General Sofrin, formerly senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate, Chief of Intelligence for Mossad, Brigadier General in Reserve, Dr. Amnon Sofrin. What am I missing here, and why should Israel capitulate?
First of all, you're not missing anything, like Amir said. If you look at the picture, at the broader picture, Hamas now is in a situation of win-win. First of all, supply, food, water, medical treatment is getting into Gaza because of international pressure upon Israel. Let's say Israel wanted at the beginning declare that nothing will go into Gaza. The people of Gaza will starve and will not have any medical treatment. And now everything comes in from many directions and many people assisting, or many entities and many nations assisting the Hamas, the Palestinians in Gaza. That's it. Second, they don't retreat from their basic demand that the war is going to stop immediately, and Israel will withdraw from Gaza Strip and guarantee that they will never eat each one of any of the leaders of Hamas leaders, not in Gaza and not abroad. And that's a burden upon Israel. Israel cannot agree to this demand because otherwise we're going to go back. Everybody that was killed during October 7th, afterwards, during the ground maneuver, are going to die in vain because we are going to leave Gaza back to the control of Hamas, just like it happens right now. Hamas is controlling Gaza. On the civilian side, Hamas is rebuilding its military capabilities. They fight Israel everywhere in Gaza Strip. They try today to infiltrate in the area of Sufa. So you cannot leave the situation just like it is, unfinished, and get out without anybody getting full responsibility upon Gaza Strip and controlling it, and to leave it in the hands of Hamas.
Thank you, General Sofrin. Also joining our discussion today is a former Air Force commander, fighter pilot, and a lot more, namely Brigadier General in Reserve, Relik Shafir. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to ask you, since the United States released a couple of figures where its initial estimates of the men that the Islamist Hamas had as its so-called terror army included roughly 25,000. Right now, estimates indicate roughly between 9 to 12,000, showing Israel's really proficiency in bringing about the targeting of Hamas terror operatives, in contrast to all the disinformation that is spouted out by various outlets throughout the region, including Al Jazeera and other Qatari and Iranian and Turkish outlets. But let's focus 1 second on what is going to happen in the days ahead, in the months ahead, since by the end of this month, June, estimates are that we will conclude our military operation in Rafah. At the same time, this will change basically the phase in which the IDF operates to a less of a broad military maneuver, but rather intelligence-driven counter-terror operations on various terror cells or splinter cells throughout the Gaza Strip. But as General Soflin already mentioned, Hamas is still in control. I had a couple of conversations with different individuals in the Gaza Strip, and they all told me, wherever you look, Hamas is still there, and they make sure that everybody knows it, not just that they're there, that they know that they're there, and they control where the humanitarian aid flows to, who receives it, who does not receive it, and there are quite a disturbing images coming out of there of Hamas also asserting its dominance by violently beating Palestinian civilians who are seeking to get those humanitarian aid for their families, for their clans, something that naturally cannot continue. And for that, either the IDF controls the Gaza Strip and becomes pretty much sitting ducks to repeated attacks by Hamas and its terror affiliates, or finds a different solution. What should we see in the next several days?
Well, allow me, since your question was so complex, allow me to go back to Prime Minister Rabin at the time, who started the peace accords with the Palestinians with the thought that as long as Iran, who was starting a nuclear program, as long as Iran does not have a nuclear program or weapon, this is a time, and we're talking 30 years ago, to start a peace negotiation with the Palestinians so that we can precede the power projection by Iran before they get hold of Lebanon and the Palestinians. Well, this has failed, as we all know, for reasons that we won't discuss now. But 30 years later, we're in a position where Iran is able to control through its proxies what is happening in the Middle East, either from the Hezbollah in the north, the militias in Iraq from the east, some in the Golan Heights, and the Houthis in the south, and of course Hamas, who, though we're not connected at the beginning or did not disclose at the beginning of their impending war on the 7th of October, they did join the effort. So we are now facing a much larger challenge that can only be thwarted by creating or joining a coalition of Western forces who are determined to fight the Iranian and Russian onslaught by creating a belt of, I would say, medium or peaceful, so to speak, Arab nations that will join a coalition. And Israel was called into that coalition as well. But unfortunately, through political indecision, was not able to create sympathy to our cause. And so we're stuck in Gaza with no alternative to Hamas, and we're stuck in the north with no backing for pushing Hezbollah, and having to deal with decision with 1701, hoping to achieve it, or create an incursion into Lebanon, which will not be favorably looked upon by the Western powers. So this is an all-encompassing uh, um, thoughts and description of what the situation is at hand before we delve into the tactical position where in a month time or so we will be able to declare a victory over Hamas, as they will be defeated militarily as cohesive military units. But their second option is administrative control with policing capabilities in Gaza, forcing Israel to actually hand the humanitarian relief to Hamas, so they, within the chaos, will be able to control Gaza for whoever knows how long, as long as Israel is not making a decision on the day after and creating a coalition with the Western forces. So I apologize for the long answer to a complex question, but I think this is something we can talk about from here on.
Indeed. Well, on October 4th, we had the opportunity to broadcast a recording of Jerusalem studio. At the time I was abroad, but nonetheless sitting in for me was Reuven Ben Shalom, Colonel Ben Shalom, together with Amir Oren, Uzi Arad, and Dr. Eran Lerman, where we asked a question, and that was the question that I asked Amir back then. After closely monitoring Hamas for several weeks, there were discussions about a dispute between Qatar and Hamas and everything that evolved from there. Naturally, the question of that program, and I encourage our viewers to look it up, what does Hamas want? And that was merely 3-4 days before the massacre of October 7th. It seems like a deja vu. At the time you were talking, Mr. Oren, about why we shouldn't conquer Gaza and the complexities that arise. Well, they have a reason. And now is the time to take tough decisions. But let's turn to northern Israel because the situation there is quite dire. Mr. Oren, what can you tell us about that?
So what is happening along the Lebanese border is that the Israeli Air Force has struck very heavily Hezbollah targets, not only adjacent to the border, but also further into Lebanon. However, Hezbollah has up to now found some ways to overwhelm the Israeli air and missile defense. Obviously, this will shift over time, but right now, perhaps they are using loitering drones. They are also, of course, using anti-tank missiles in order to hit buildings, which was not their original purpose. But if there are soldiers or civilians within the structures, they are being hurt. What happened yesterday was that 2 of these drones did hit the Druze village of Khorfash. Some 11 people were wounded, some of them slightly, but a few more severely. And one soldier who happened to be at Khorfash was killed. And the IAF, which is operating the air and missile defense, is looking into this incident because there was no alert, no sirens directed the people who were at Khorfash to their shelters. It was out of the blue. In addition to that, of course, there have been dozens of alerts and dozens of launches into various towns and villages in the 20 kilometers or so south of the border. And obviously, if the war flares up, Hezbollah will be able to hit targets to the south, such as Haifa and even Tel Aviv and Beersheba.
And Israel
And
will be
beyond.
able to hit Beirut and Tripoli and so on and so forth. It will be a devastating war. Everybody knows that. It will. We will obviously have to deal with the consequences thereof. The costs are high, but the costs will be high not only for Lebanon and Hezbollah, but also for Iran and all of its proxies in the region, because this will not remain in one sector. And therefore, I'd like to ask you, General Sofrin, you know, I had a conversation about the situation in Lebanon. People there are devastated. The quantity or the volume of chatter amongst the Shiite population with regard to resentment and to not only resentment towards Hezbollah particularly and to Iran, but rather about telling Hezbollah and Iran, why should we die for Gaza? That's basically the main message coming over and over again towards this Iranian proxy. But it seems if we zoom out to the strategic level, the Iranians are looking at one thing and one thing alone. How can they preserve their regime, the Ayatollah regime, and how can they preserve their tool that may allow them to preserve that regime, and that is their nuclear capacity, potentially racing towards a nuclear bomb, something that now the Europeans have tabled a censor at the Board of Governors of the IAEA with the backing of the United States, even though the Americans were not happy with it initially and tried to thwart it. And now they're going to work together to try and basically shore up support for the censor that may end up bringing about a snapback that then would consequently and undoubtedly threaten the Ayatollah regime once more from total collapse.
Let me refer to two of the items that you just mentioned. First of all, regarding the nuclear weapon system of Iran. The Iranians are, I'm not sure that they're going or aiming to get a nuclear bomb right now. And even they decide right now to do that, it will take them at least 2 years, if not more than that, to assemble everything together and to be able to launch it either by missile or by aircraft. Usually that I think they prefer to do it by missiles, but nevertheless, it will take time. So it's not something that is going to happen tomorrow. Everybody is worried about the thing that they have over 130 kilos of uranium is enriched beyond 60%. And from there to 90%, it's a very, very short way. That means it can be done within a few days, if they decide to do that. But I think the Iranians are now settling with being a threshold country, a nuclear threshold country, and not aiming to, break the rules and, get out of the NPT and say, okay, we're now focusing on creating our own bomb, because they're going to risk and jeopardize the existence of their regime towards the international community. That's it. Second, the Iranians are they generated or orchestrated what we call the multi-arena confrontation with Israel, based on its proxies. First and most of all is Hezbollah in Lebanon, but they hold Hezbollah not to extend the fighting with Israel, because they say we didn't build their capacity in order to, in a way, nicely said, to waste it on the Palestinians in Gaza, but in case of the deterioration between Israel and Iran. That's your aim. Now, nevertheless, the Hezbollah is keeping the IDF all along the border between those two countries. They claim that they hold, or at least track, about 1/3 of the Israeli forces into the northern front. Otherwise, they will be diverted to go to Gaza and to fight there. And of course, they publish each day who was killed, how many people. They publish the names, the photographs, and so on, to prove that they are participating and share the sorrow of the brothers, and they're fighting with them arm to arm. But it's
Indeed.
not enough, and I think that Hezbollah knows and Iran knows that they're not willing right now to extend or to go into a larger war with Israel, and not to drag Israel, up to the end and to leave it with no choice but to get in and begin engaging Hezbollah at Lebanon.
Hezbollah earlier today announced the number 333, which obviously is the number of Hezbollah terror operatives who have been killed since October 8th. With that being said, of course, there have been also a lot more, roughly 200 more members of Amal, of Hamas, of other terror organizations that are affiliated.
Right now. Right.
Indeed. So we're waiting to see how this evolves, but one thing is sure, and that is something that has been relayed to the United States via mediators by the Islamic Republic of Iran. If Israel and Hezbollah go into an all-out war with each other, Iran intends to enter into the theater. I'm somewhat skeptical about that because that would guarantee the end of the regime. But nonetheless, General Shafir, can the IDF contend on the one hand with targeting the multiple thousands of targets throughout Lebanon in order to degrade it, and it will be devastating to the point where Hezbollah would be weak enough for its rivals to do the rest of the job, and at the same time also contend defensively against whatever Iran is scheming, together with Hashd al-Shabi, with Ansar Allah, and the other terror proxies operating throughout this region, and including from Iran proper.
My guess is that the attacks from afar, from Iran and the Houthis and others, and the militias in Iraq, will be contended with through the United States and its allies, and Israel will deal with Hezbollah and perhaps concentrate on weakening Hezbollah without hitting Lebanon's infrastructure, so as to create an interest for Lebanon to put pressure on Hezbollah as it is weakened. So the attacks would probably be on the in the Baalbek area, in their heavier weapons that are much easier to detect and attack, and only then take care of the smaller arms and push Hezbollah off the border about 10, 15 kilometers. That would be made easy because anything that moves in southern Lebanon at this time, as Hezbollah, all the inhabitants have left, about 100,000 have gone north, much like Israeli inhabitants that have gone south. So the war in Lebanon, as far as that's concerned, is much easier. No collateral damage problems, no civilians, etc., etc. So that would enable the Air Force and the ground forces to hit Hezbollah at will. Israel will take a beating, but it's a choice. Do we do it now or postpone it for 2 or 3 years? Because the threat is there. It will be coming. It is part of the Iranian philosophy and strategy to a war of attrition with Israel. And it's not sustainable because the people in the north of Israel will not go back before they see a convincing change in the north, be it diplomatic or military.
This is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Shafir, General Sofrin, and Mr. Oren for your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.